please?
Yeah.
Whenever you're ready.
My name is Ed Paretti, and I was a tail gunner on the Torrance crew. With 715th Bomb Squadron, 448th Bomb Group in Seething.
And what can you describe your journey, or a little bit of your journey over to England? What route did you take?
Going over to England?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we left the overseas training facility in Charleston, South Carolina, and we took the train up to Mitchell Field, New York. And we stayed there, I think, 2 nights with a heavy snowfall at that time. And we took off for Bangor, Maine. And at Bangor, Maine, it was about 2 feet of snow. And we were snowed in there for almost a week. And we took off from Bangor, Maine and went to Labrador. And we stayed overnight at Labrador, and from there we went to Greenland. And that was a little scary flying into Greenland, because I was half asleep when I woke up and there was mountains on either side of us. And if I remember, the runway in Greenland was a little bit uphill, with water at the bottom of the hill. And I think when we took off down that hill, and we landed going up. But we stayed there overnight, and I can remember airplanes coming in and circling and then heading east again. They tell me they were the Canadian twin-engine fighter bomber. I can't remember the name of them. You remember the twin-engine fighter bomber that made in Canada, the plywood airplane?
Mosquito.
The Mosquito, yeah. And evidently they were ferrying them over from Canada, and they'd circle over Greenland and keep right on going. And we stayed there overnight, and then we went to Iceland. And we stayed at Iceland one night. And from Iceland we went to Valley, Wales. And I think we stayed in Valley, Wales 2 nights. And from there we went to Seething. And we stayed in a temporary barracks for a couple of nights, and air raid warning there, I think 2 nights in a row, while we were in a temporary barracks with another crew. And then finally we were settled in our own barracks with a crew piloted by Sam Haley. And they had already flown about 15 missions, I think. And we didn't do anything for 3 or 4 days or a week, and first thing you know, we were mixing cement and laying sidewalks out in front of the hut. It was very muddy. And after that job was done, they gave us a 3-day pass to London. We went down to London for 3 days, and when we came back, our name was on aboard the fly. So we flew the next day, and the mission was Hanover. And on our way out, we lost an engine. And coming back, I don't know whether the Navigator got lost a little bit or whatever, but they tell me he flew over The Hague. And what I thought was hailstones hitting the airplane, it turned out to be flak, I guess. The Germans had the mobile guns on the railroad tracks or something at that time. And anyway, what you don't know don't hurt you, I guess. So we landed, and the next day, the mission was Berlin. And I think that was our first mission.
Berlin.
And there was an awful lot of flak, but it wasn't too accurate. And I understand they didn't lose too many airplanes that day. There was different numbers. I heard at one time they only lost 14, and they never really come out with it. No one ever really agrees on the facts. And
what about fighters? You come across any fighters on any of those?
Pardon?
Did you come across any German fighters on any of those early missions?
Fighters? No, we didn't see fighters that day. But then went on, we flew, I guess, 6 missions. I don't have the missions written down here, but... and then we had another 3-day pass. And then we flew 6 more. on the 12th mission, we went to Royan, near the Bordeaux pocket. We dropped the gasoline jelly bombs. And our crew didn't carry guns. We didn't have any guns on that trip. But I understand, talking to other people, they did carry guns. Now, the word told us that we didn't carry guns because of the fact we didn't want, with all the gasoline jelly bombs and the fumes, we didn't want to cause an explosion or anything. But anyway, we got back from Royan, and the next day, we were scheduled for Landshut or something like that. And we were taking off down the runway, and I was sitting in the waist with the machine gun across my, sitting on an ammunition box with the machine gun across my chest, looking out the window. And I looked at that wheel, and it was about 3 feet off the ground. And oh no, I said, we're only halfway down the runway. How can we be 3 feet off the ground? And all of a sudden, we started to go back down. And I yelled to my buddy, who was a nose gunner at that time, I think he was 18 years old, to get on the floor. And we got on the floor, and we went off the end of the runway. And ammunition was going off someplace, and fire. And we tried to get out the camera hatch. I couldn't get the camera hatch open myself. That's the escape hatch in the back. I couldn't get that open. And finally, this buddy of mine, Caruso, I said, give me a hand with this. And both of us got on that latch, and we finally got it open. And we're resting on the tail skid. And that just gave us enough room to crawl out underneath there. And we got out. My first intent was to run away, because of the explosion. And we started to run away, and all of a sudden we looked up and we saw a pilot coming out the left window. And we went back. And from there, I don't know just how they got down. I don't know what happened to the other 2 gunners. But Crusoe and I stayed together. And the crash truck came in, and what fire was there, they put out. And some men got up on top of the airplane and started chopping away there. And I stood right in front of the airplane at that time with the heavy flying suit and everything on. And all of a sudden, fire broke out on, I think, number 2 engine, I guess, in that area. And all hell broke loose, and everybody, you could hear everybody saying, get out of here, run, run. And I dove underneath an ambulance. Crusoe and I were underneath that ambulance when that blew up. And all I can remember is that ambulance jumping up in the air. And there's a lot of descriptions. I have some pictures of that, by the way, what was left there. And some tell me there were 2 explosions. Now that, I have no idea how many there were. But anyway, our co-pilot, Calamini, wasn't with us that day. He was in sick bay. And the story is that he said we flew 6 missions in a row, and even our radio operator and engineer weren't feeling good too, and he tried to talk them into going to sick bay, but no, they flew on the mission. In the meantime, at that crash, the top turret came down, and the radio operator and the engineer, the Navigator and the Bombardier were trapped between the pilot seat and the top turret. And the Bombardier had only flown 1 mission, and that was the day before, the Royan. And this is the 2nd mission. I never really met the guy. And he got killed. The 4 of them got killed in that crash. The rescue people were talking to the 4 of them, but they couldn't get them out. And when that fire blew, some of the local people, like, I don't know whether Pat Everson remembers the explosion, or some of the local people have told me about, the smoke went a mile high. But that was the end. We had one of the interesting missions that I recall is refers to how records get distorted. We were flying on a mission. I'm not sure whether it was to Buchan. According to Ed Shue's books, it was Buchan, but it wasn't Buchan that we were on. Anyway, on the way in, when it came time to transfer the fuel from the Tokyo tanks to the main tank, our engineer had trouble. So the pilot called the leader to see if we could turn back, and he said, no, you can't turn back. After the bomb run, stay on a bomb run because we're getting hit by jets. Stay on a bomb run until after you drop the bombs, then take the shortest route back, which we did. And the shortest route back, over the intercom came the pilot and he said, when I ring the bell, you fellas bail out because we're out of fuel. So I said, how about me, Doug? You know, you stay in the tail turret. He said, you have to look out for the fighters. So I said, I can't put the parachute on in the tail turret, right? So anyway, I got out of the tail turret, I put my parachute on, and I kneeled in front of it with my hands reaching in on the guns. But I wasn't about to sit in there. So anyway, we circled down, we started to get lower and lower and lower, and I turned the tail turret all the way around. When the tail turret is all the way around to one side, there's a space about 5 or 6 inches where it's open, and you can look straight down. I used to look straight down and watch the bombs go down. And I looked down, there was an airfield there. And I had a lot of training in recognition because I had trained to be a pilot at one time. And I looked down, I called the pilot, and I said, Doug, they look like P-47s down there. So I'm way down, and everybody else looked out. Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I had cancer of the throat, and it's tender.
Sure, that's fine. Okay, sorry, carry on.
So everybody confirmed the fact that they were P-47s, and we went down. It was up in the corner of northeast Germany or Belgium. The territory was all dug up by tanks and armored vehicles, I guess, and it was a steel mat runway. And we landed on that runway, and they pushed us off into right off the runway into the mud. And in no time at all, the wheels were in mud about 10, 12 inches deep. And they filled it up with fuel. Now, this is where the facts get distorted. They filled it up with fuel, and the ground crew didn't want to put the chain on it and pull it out with the engines running. But we had a waste gunner. He said, I know how to drive that thing. He said, I'll drive the cleat track and with the engines running. So that was all well, good, and fine. The engines were still idling, and there was a ground crew man digging under the right landing wheel. He had a shovel there. And with that, there was another man up by the nose wheel. And he yelled to his buddy, throw me that shovel. So the guy took the shovel and threw it. And it got caught in number 2 propeller. And went right into the airplane as our engineer was coming out the nose wheel hatch. The nose wheel escape hatch right up there someplace. So they stopped the engines, and all it did was put a little nick in the propeller, no damage at all. So with that, we got back in the airplane, we pulled that thing up onto the steel mat and took off for England. When we got back to England, it was dark, just got dark, and one of the officers pulled up in his Jeep and came down, he saw that hole, he said, you got hit. I said, yeah, by a shovel. Well, he didn't know whether to believe me or not. But anyway, the crew chief came over. He said, what happened? What happened? And our flight engineer said, I couldn't transfer the fuel. He said, it's amazing. I didn't know what to do. I could just, no matter what I did, I couldn't transfer the 250 gallons on each wing tank in. The crew chief said, oh, you got to do this, you have to do that, you have to turn the other knob. And this poor flight engineer looked at him and said, gee, I never studied that model in school. I said, you bum, you better go back to school. We made a joke out of it, really, you know. You better go back to school before we fly again. But anyway, the fact is that the story is that, anyway, we got back to England, and the story came out that we were heavily damaged by Flak and landed in Belgium. Now, Ed Shue has that story in his book, that we were heavily damaged by Flak. The other guy, who was a nephew of somebody, wrote that big book on the 448th. He has the same story, and I talked to him about that. I said, that's distorting the facts, I said. But that isn't anything. Schilling tells a story. Did he tell you? You interviewed Schilling? Did he tell you the story about the life raft getting caught in a tail?
Yes.
And they said it was hit by a tree. Yeah. And this story now in Iraq reminds me of the same thing, where they shot this officer, and they distort the facts.
On that mission with did you see any jet fighters? Did you ever see any jet fighters on any mission?
Well, I'm going to tell you this story, and I just can't remember the mission, although I do have an air medal that's dated April of 5th. And that airplane that's cut in half, we were flying ahead of that, a group ahead of that. Now that flight back there was Ed Shue's flight. And I always tried the best I could to get around some of the facts on this. And I watched those jets come down to my right, circle that group, and shoot the hell out of them. And one jet came right at us. And we were flying in a low right, what they call a coffin corner. And that jet came at me. And as far as everybody in my flight knows, I was the only one shooting at him. And to make a long story short, it was posted on the squadron bulletin board that was confirmed kill. Now, I got a call to go into CQ's office the next day to go in there. And this guy said he was a gunnery officer, whoever the hell he was. Wanted to know if I would appear at the Post Theater the next night to give a talk. And at that time, I was reluctant to talk because I wasn't a public speaker, and I said, I don't want to go in there. So I took off and took a walk around the base. I never did go there. Now, that's a true story. And the only ones that know this story, my co-pilot, when I talked to him in Texas, he said, oh, geez, I tell everybody about how you shot down a jet. Now, the crew that was up on top of that flight, the second on the left, the top gunner, he said he couldn't get a shot at him. And he says that airplane went down. No, I didn't see him go down. I'm not going to say he went down. All I know is what was on the bulletin board and that they wanted me to appear. Now, if I told this to Ed Shue, he'd say I was full of shit. So this is why I don't mention it. I'm mentioning it to you. But these are facts.
Can you describe what that was like when that was coming at you?
Well, you're very, very, very scared. And when the gunnery officer said to me, you know, you're supposed to start firing at 600 yards. He said, when did you start firing? He must have been 3 miles out. I said, I started firing when I assumed he was going to come toward me, and I never let up. He's a good boy. That's all he said. I never let up. And as I'm sitting here, he came right over. And you can see him. And he was smoking like hell. Now, whether that was smoke from the jet engine, I don't know.
Could you see him in the cockpit?
Pardon?
Could you see the pilot?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he was that close. And Ed Shue tells the same story about he could see the pilot coming in. Ed Shue opened up. He emptied his machine gun on the guy. Now, whether that's the same one that came toward us, or even whether it's the same flight, it has to be the same flight because Charlie Cup was the one that got. Did you talk to Charlie Cup's daughter? He's the one that got out. It's the same flight that they claim I shot down a jet. Now, if you want to confirm, you ever want to talk to my co-pilot, I'll give you his number. He's in San Antonio, Texas. I don't have it with me. If you give me your address, I'll send it to you.
Yeah, that'd be great.
He wound up to be a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force as a dentist. And I called him when we were in San Antonio. I wanted to go see him. And he had just come out of open heart surgery. And he wasn't about to have any company, he told me. But he had been to England. He met Pat. But he doesn't come to any of the meetings. And our pilot hasn't associated with anyone at all. I wrote to him once. Now, why that airplane crashed, I have no... Oh, and another thing is, the first book that was published by an Englishman over there used to be very active around the 448th. I can't think of his name. Distinguished-looking guy. I picked up his book one time in the library, and he describes that mission where we crashed. And he gives the name of a co-pilot. And I've been trying to find out who that co-pilot was, and nobody ever heard of him. Because when our pilot was sick, and we had a substitute co-pilot, his name was Donald D. Francisco Jr. And to make a long story short, I didn't care for him. Because, in my opinion, I think he may have caused that crash. In my opinion, he may have lifted the flaps instead of the wheels. I don't know. But I only met him once, and that was after the war, we came back from the rest home, and we were all laying on a bed around in one of the rooms there someplace, and he didn't impress me too much. And aside from that, he was a very, very close relative of General Hodges. And there again, the facts got distorted. The general's relative wasn't flying in that airplane.
Can you describe, did you ever have any experiences with getting hit by flak?
No, the only time flak ever touched us was on that trip back from Hanover, and a couple of small pellets. We never, although Ed Shue's article said we were heavily damaged. Never touched by flak. I saw a lot of it going through Berlin. You could just might as well go out and walk on that stuff. But if it's all black, they say it's not close. The only time it's close is when you see the red burst. And then Berlin was loaded with flak, but it wasn't accurate. But I've been on missions going in to the north and watched airplanes that were bombing Frankfurt to the south, and I counted parachutes going down on many missions that weren't close to us.
Did you see a lot of ships going down?
Pardon?
Did you ever see ships going down, explosions? And
The only ship I saw go down is that one that's cut in half there. But the other ones in the distance, it's hard to, some of them that are hard to see that are hit. And you see the parachutes.
so you had a good view of the one that was of Charlie Cups.
Of Charlie Cups? Oh yeah. He was flying. I understand on that mission that some of the airplanes went to Weisendorf, is it? And some of them went to another target. And I believe Ed Shue's crew and our flight were going to different targets, even though we were in the same area. I think we were going to different targets.
So how long did that
Pardon?
Charlie Cup's plane, you know, how long did that event, him going down and that tail coming off there, can you describe it?
I didn't see Charlie Cup's parachute, to tell you the truth. I saw the airplane cut in half. I saw that one. And at that time, you're scared hell.
What about when you went out on a pass? When you went on a pass, where did you go? Did you go Norwich and London? When you were on a pass from base?
In London?
How did you spend your free time?
Well, I remember going to the movies there, and at that time, movie right down around Piccadilly there someplace. I remember one time, the guy in back of us had binoculars, and they threw him out. You're not allowed to have binoculars in some of those shows? And the girls can stand nude, but they can't move or something in those days. Yeah, I remember that. I can't think of the name of the theater. It was a big theater in London.
What was London like back then?
Pardon?
What was London like back then?
Very crowded, very crowded. And when we came back from the rest home, the same guy that towed that airplane out of the mud was like a Philadelphia lawyer. He said, and it was rumored the war was going to end. So he said, I'm going down to the flight surgeon, and I'm going to fill his head with some stories that you guys are a nervous wreck. You need more time off. His name was Brady from Spokane, Washington. And sure enough, he came back with 4 passes. He said, let's get the hell out of here, he said, because I think the war's going to end. So we couldn't wait to get our bag and run for the Norwich to get the train. And we were on a train to London when we got word that the war was over. And when we got to London, man, you've seen those pictures of London on VA Day, climbing all over those double-decker buses and screaming and yelling. And my buddy and I went into a bar. I was sitting at a bar drinking, and a couple of fellas down to the right of us drinking. I looked down, it can't be them. So they went out, and I said to my friend, I said, there are a couple of guys from my hometown in Hastings. I was born in Hastings on Hudson. And there are a couple of guys I know from Hastings, I said. He said, well, go get them. So I ran out quick and ran down the street and got them, and 2 friends of mine, Billy Newell and Harold Ulmer. And they were in the ground forces. We met, and 4 of us went in. We had a big dinner, a nice fancy restaurant. I forget where it was, but we all had a big dinner. Got half drunk again. But to stay in Northport, where the rest home was, we were there a couple of weeks, and that was a real nice place. We were in what they call the Palace Hotel. Big old hotel about a little half a mile out of town. It was a walk. We always walked it. They had a small pitch and putt golf course there. And before we went up there, the 2 boys that got killed, the radio operator and the engineer, they flew on some kind of a training flight over to France one time, and they came back. They had this bottle of cognac, and it was still in the barracks. And then going away, the pilot gave us a bottle of scotch. So we had the bottle of scotch and a bottle of cognac we brought with us. We had it in a room for a couple of days, and finally the 4 of us said, we have to drink that booze. And they said, all right, tomorrow after breakfast, we'll drink that booze. So after breakfast, we come back to the room. We passed a bottle of scotch around. It wasn't cognac, it was champagne. We drank the scotch and chased it with champagne, and that bottle kept going around, till both bottles were empty. And Caruso and I took a walk to town. How the hell we walked on it? We got to town, And it was sort of like an inlet there with some water, and they rented rowboats. So Crusoe and I got in a rowboat. I couldn't row that, but I pulled the oars out of the water. I got him soaking wet. And he said, let me try it. So he tried it, and he got me wet. So we pulled the boat over to the side. There was a couple of kids there. Hey, kids, you want to row this boat? We gave the boat to a couple of kids. Then we get out of there. We met two girls at the pitch and putt golf course. So we decided to play golf. You can imagine how stewed we were. We played golf for a little bit with these two girls, and they probably saw how drunk we were. They left. We went back and went to sleep. But we had...
And was that in Norwich then?
Huh?
That was in Norwich?
Northport.
Northport.
At the rest home.
Ah.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you also about, a lot of the other guys said that the whole time they were receiving, some of them they felt that they couldn't remember seeing the sun.
Seeing the sun?
Seeing the sun, it was always
I don't know.
grey and, how was it for you?
I know one thing, all the while I was seething, while I was flying, I never had a drink. I said, if they're going to get me, they're going to get me sober. And all my buddies and Sam Haley's crew, they took their bicycles out to that pub every night. They wind up carrying their bicycles back, they wrecked them and fall off. And Richard Lawrence. But after the war was over, they had a squadron party. I don't know whether the party was for the whole field or what, but we had this beer party in an open field. And I don't know whether I should tell you this story or not. It's humorous. This other crew had a guy named Richard Lawrence Otis, and I didn't find out until after the war that he was hitting the emergency kits and taking a morphine, was it, or something in there, make a high or something. And anyway, we all got drunk, and Ray Dennis, I guess he was 9 years old at the time. He was a very good friend of Otis's. He used to take Otis's laundry, and they were good friends. And Ray was there with Otis, and he, 9-year-old kid drinking a few beers too, I guess. So the first thing you know, geez, I felt something. So, what the hell is that, raining? My leg was all wet. There was Otis standing behind me. He had it in my back pocket. Urinated in my back pocket. With that son of a gun. I said, I'll get him. I waited until he was stewed. I returned the favor. So, on our way back to the barracks, Ray said, I'm going to ask my father if I can sleep in the barracks with you guys tonight, which he used to once in a while. So he's going to sleep in the barracks, and he slept with Otis. The next morning I wake up, and there's Otis sleeping on the floor. I said, Otis, what the hell happened? He says, Ray went to bed last night. I said, see, serves you right. I said, you got a double. But when we came back from the 3-day pass, when the war was over, everything was lit up. We come back, my buddy and I walk up to the barracks, and Otis's crew, everybody was restricted. See, we got off the base just in time. The other crew in the barracks, they were restricted. And they was held up. We got back there, and they were shooting all over. And somebody locked the door, one door, and Otis had a flare gun. I don't know what the hell made him do it, but he took that flare gun, he blew a hole in that door, I think. He fired a gun at that door, and geez, everybody started to run. We didn't do any damage. Another time, we used to carry 45s. And we're getting ready to go on a mission at 4 o'clock in the morning or so. And I was twirling a 45, laying in a bed. And geez, I'd like to shoot a couple of holes in the roof. And somebody said, I dare you. Well, they no sooner said, I dare you, and I went pop, pop. And I used to look at those two holes every morning when I woke up and see the light coming in. And I had read in some of the journals that I wasn't the only guy to put a couple of holes in the ceiling.
Do you ever, were you artistic at all? Did you have any, were you artistic? Did you paint any nose art or know anyone that painted nose art?
No. I don't even remember the only one I can remember was Piccadilly Lily. And we were supposed to fly Piccadilly Lily the day it crossed the Rhine. And we laid in the bed, and you don't get out of bed unless they wake you. They woke up the crew across from us, the 6 men. They never woke, they never shook us. We just laid in bed, waiting to be shaken, but they didn't shake us. Some command pilot or somebody flew the airplane. We were knocked off and somebody else flew it, and it went down. The day it crossed the Rhine, it went down. I'm lucky all around. But they're stories, and the only thing I can say is they're true stories. Everything I tell you is true. Because at my age, I don't have to falsify anything.
What was the weather like? How did you deal with the cold and the things like that? Did that affect you?
Well, they had a miserable winter, but I got there in February '45, and the weather was just getting pretty good. We had pretty good weather when I was there. But I understand just before we got there, the weather was very December, January. We had fairly good weather.
What about, so you didn't get too much mud or anything like that? There wasn't too much mud? Some guys complain about a lot of mud, but I guess that was...
Well, I told you, we started to put those sidewalks around the front of our hut. I don't know whether they did around all of them or not, but they had a mixer there, and I said we worked there for a week or two, and they gave us a pass. And that was unusual. They give people a pass before they started to fly, but then they give you a pass before they send you to Berlin. Parkham. Parkham was the other mission. Parcham, the day that airplane was shot down. Weisendorf and Parcham. They were tough missions. Buchan and Parcham and Weisendorf. But most of the missions, I had it easy compared to most of the crews. We had it very easy.
What about conditions? What about conditions on the plane? How did you feel about the cold and the? Did you ever get ice? Get ice freeze?
No, I never had that trouble. No, I never had any trouble icing up. The heated suits, you know, get a little warm on your back. But we had good equipment. And the tail turret was a very good place to be. It had, you know, good armament. It was an excellent turret.
What about you said that there was a kid. Was that the same kid that did your laundry?
He wouldn't take my laundry. He'd take he wouldn't take anybody on our crew. He said he had enough. But even with that, I used to bring him home stuff from the mess hall, or oranges or apples or something we didn't eat. We used to give him everything. And his father had a farm right across the street from our barracks. I never did see it, but I understand it was across the road. And when Otis's crew were about to leave, you know, they said they were restricted. You can't take this, you can't take that. And geez, they had 645s there they were trying to give away. I said, I don't want a gun. I said, I'm too reckless with a gun. I said, I don't need a 45. But anyway, they packed a big bag and they put it over the ditch on the other side of the road because they're going to have an inspection. And lo and behold, when they went to get the bag, it was gone. So Otis got a hold of Ray, the kid. Just by chance, he said, Ray, you go tell your father to bring that bag back. And he did. They sort of sensed that he had taken it, you know. But he may have thought that maybe somebody just left it, you know.
See what else I've got here. Oh, what about Jimmy Stewart, Clark Gable, any of those guys? You ever meet those guys or hear stories
No,
about those
no,
guys?
no. No, it was uneventful.
What did you worry about the most when you were flying? Is that something, one particular thing that you concerned you more than anything else?
I don't really know what you're worried about. It's amazing how you go through all this training, and I think the majority just don't worry about anything. They just, this is what we're going to do, and it's just that you're doing your job, I guess. You're scared, no question. But if you have superstitions, you go through the rigmarole. You know, if you have a superstition, I had a hat like the officers wear, the crushed cap, you know, and I always wore that hat on landings and takeoffs. That was my superstition. And I went through the crash, I still had that hat on.
What about, some of the guys mentioned that mostly guys were superstitious and not really overly religious. There might have been, do you ever know any crews that prayed a lot?
At that time, I wasn't over religious. I've become more religious in older age because the girl I married was very religious. But I've been religious since I've been married. But before that, I wasn't. Most of the guys on our crew went to a service before they went up, and I didn't. I'm not bragging about it, but I didn't. I said a few prayers in there. I probably said more prayers in an airplane. But I didn't go for any special service.
How did you find the English people? What are your thoughts about what the English people were like back then?
Well, they took the war real serious, and they've been through a lot, and it showed. They very obliging, and I think they're still that way. I think they appreciated what was done for them more than the people in this country do. They know more about the war than the people in this country do, because they were affected more by it. People in this country were never affected by a war, except the Civil War, which was brutal. But since then, the newer generations, World War II, and they're forgotten pretty quick. Over there, you have all those memorials, and stay active in them, especially up around Norwich with those 54 bomb fields. It's a little different. Here people don't know that Norwich was heavily bombed before London around that time. It's insignificant.
What about buzz bombs? Did you ever hear a buzz bomb drop near the base?
One time when I was in London, yeah, I heard one come over. Yeah. I don't know whether...
Sorry, carry on.
I don't know whether any of these stories are any good to you or not, but...
Yeah, it's all good. It's all,
Pardon?
it's all, I'd be interested in anything that you've got to say is worthwhile, so...
No, I'm just thankful that I got out of it alive, and the 4 men that got killed with Jim Gleason was the radio operator, and he was my closest friend. And he was from Boston. Hairman Merrill, the flight engineer, was from Asheville, North Carolina. And both of those boys were going to get married when they got home. They had girlfriends. And the Navigator, I think he was a school teacher. He was married. I spent one night at his house when we were in Charleston. He had a very pretty wife. His name was McNeil, I think, something like that. And the Bombardier, they say he only flew the one mission. And his name was Beanland. And his grave is still over in Mattingly. The Navigator and the flight engineer and the radio operator, their bodies aren't there anymore. Because when my daughter went over, she took pictures. And at that time, the only one she could find was Beanland. And then when I went over in '95, the other three weren't there either. They had taken them back to the States.
Yeah, I haven't been there yet. I haven't been to Mattingly.
Mattingly, very impressive. Very impressive. Yeah, they did quite a job over there.
Is there anything else you want to mention?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I talked too much already. But they're interesting stories.
Yeah. Well, thanks for talking to me. I appreciate it.
But if you ever wanted to call this guy Calamini about that jet, and he might be able to inform you of something. The pilot, well, all of those fellows. Yep. There you go.